Thanks, Abdullah, for having me. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see a full house still. This is the last session, I know. I am Arundhati Banerjee. I head the Inception program and the VC Alliance program for Nvidia for South Asia. So I'll give you a very brief idea about what the program is. I know the topic of this roundtable is AI safety. And as you know that everyone in this country is trying to do something with AI, right? We are all experimenting. Either we are trying to build a business or we are trying to use it. So we have more than 200,000 startups in the country, and there's almost 7,500 deep tech startups, as we all know, which comprises of a huge proportion of AI-first startups. So what we do is, as part of the Inception program, it's a free and flexible program where we work with startups, not just AI ones, but anyone who wants to use the accelerated computing platform and support them with infrastructure support, technical support and guidance, raising funds as well as funding in a few startups, and then help them with GTM support. So that's what we typically do with the startups. Unlike other corporate incubators, we don't run a cohort-based model. But what we rather do is, since we understand that deep tech ventures take time, we have to be patient. So we give them a long runway. So we work with them right from their day zero till they're 10 years old, and then we graduate them to a different program. And on the contrary, we also have another program, which is a sister program called Nvidia VC Alliance. There might be investors in this room as well. So we work with a bunch of them because you talk to startups day in, day out. So we try to pick up your brain to understand that what's the next groundbreaking innovation happening so that we can go ahead, collaborate with them, join hands, and make that impact for the country and build it for the world. So that's what we do. Abdullah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Banerjee. Dialogue can introduce themselves. Jamila, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Abdullah. Thanks for having us. I'm Jamila from The Dialogue. I'm a lawyer by training. I lead the Dialogue's work on artificial intelligence policy and also manage public affairs strategy for the organization. At The Dialogue, we're proud to be the secretariat for a coalition on responsible evolution of AI, where we do a lot of AI safety-related work, where we sort of make channels for different kind of stakeholders to come together and inform the government's approach and their thinking on AI policy at large, more specifically AI safety. I wouldn't want to take a lot of time because I know we're short on that. So that's about me. Kamish.
I think Jamila's already introduced what I also do. I shadow her and everything. So I'm Kamish Shekhar. I'm an associate director. I look into the strategy and research at The Dialogue. And as I mentioned, I genuinely shadow whatever she just mentioned. Yeah.
Professor Chauhan.
Hi everyone, I am Siddharth. I teach at Jindal Global Law School and I'm the director for the Cyril Shroff Center for AI Law and Regulation. We are a dedicated research center which has been endowed by Mr. Cyril Shroff, and we are very grateful for his endowment, and our work especially focuses on cutting edge research on AI related to specifically to healthcare. That's what we're currently working with, and a lot of parliamentary responses where we are actively involved in deliberating with them. Thank you.
Perfect. So we can start now. Thank you so much, everyone. So in global South setting, we do see that AI adoption is rapidly outpacing the institutional readiness. And when audit bandwidth, procurement leverage, and all of these things are a bit constrained in these environments, responsible AI might fail in some predictable ways. I would like to welcome Dr. Goswami to just start with about where does the machinery actually break between when statute is notified and it actually changing institutional behavior? And what is the weakest link in India's AI governance framework right now, especially considering that your experience is a lot around tech policy and even legislation? So over to you.
Thanks very much. And nice, interesting, provocative question, right, for the last session of the day. So I think let's break this in the 5 minutes that I have into 3 buckets. We'll talk about what the institutional design is, talk a little bit about capacity, and then we'll talk about some other factors. So the institutional design, if you look at where we are in India today, it's very fragmented. There's no overarching horizontal AI law at all. And that is a little by design. Because the government has not wanted to go that direction. So is that in and of itself bad? It's not in and of itself bad, because if you look at the spectrum of different countries in the global south. Some have gone for those overarching laws. You see Brazil going in that direction. There are plenty of countries that have gone the other direction. The issue with that is you have to then have a whole of government coordination, because we have regulators on the one side, we have an IT Act with rules. Some of you will be familiar with what came out on the 10th of February on synthetically generated information. And you have other things going on, right? So how do you coordinate that? The principal scientific advisor in the Prime Minister's office says that there's going to be a structure. Let's hope that works, right? The second part is, if the design is that by design, it's very light touch on regulatory enforcement. That is a theme that has been there ever since the country moved forward on the Data Protection Board. That is not a heavy-handed regulator. Now you're seeing the same thing emerging on AI. Are we going to have an EU AI office? No. I mean, we're looking at an AI safety institute of some type as part of this structure. Now you may say that maybe this is a lesson learnt, right, out of failures that we've had in the past under the IT Act. But there are other problems that arise out of that, because if you have heavy compliance burdens on market players and inadequate capacity on regulatory enforcement, you'll have an issue. The last part, and I think the most serious on design, frankly, is we have a top-down regulatory structure. We do not have co-regulation. So what I mean by that is, when you've got something as fast-moving as AI, if everything is dependent on a top-down regulation and you don't have industry standards as the first line of defense, then you're going to have issues around that. So there are definitely challenges in the very design. The second challenge, though, is on capacity. Now, why is capacity important? Well, if you're going to impose a 3-hour, 3-day, whatever limit you're going to on market players, famously in the SGI rule, okay, but do you have the capacity then to verify that? How are you going to do that? Do you have the GPU capacity? Do you have the ability to run that kind of verification process? Because if you don't, then you're depending just on good faith, right? So that's a serious capacity challenge. Last part is other factors. So if we are going to manage both the opportunity and the risk, we have to be clear as to where liabilities lie. At the moment in the life cycle, between developers, deployers, and users, that's not clear. That's something that we have to come to. If we do it too much, we're going to strangle innovation. If we do it too little and not in the right place, we're going to end up with risks and harms. So we have to settle those things. Last point is this. We say, global south and all that. Not everything about AI is to do with the technology itself. What about the back end of it? When you create e-waste of the type that we're going to when you have AI, do we have a green blind spot? I think we probably do in terms of the way in which we manage waste. So I think there are some significant challenges around this. Some things which, is work in progress. And I think hopefully if all of you kind of contribute to how this is going to get better, as a collective enterprise, we're going to do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goswami. That was very interesting. I would like to move to Mr. Arora from MasterCard. So in payments and finance, small errors scale fast. And in a country like India, when adoption of AI is very high, and of course, and is very digitally integrated as a country in terms of DPI and all of that, I want to ask you, when AI is used in high volume financial systems like India, what institutional breakdown do you generally tends to surface first under the real world stress in a country like India or in the global south context? It's a very broad question, so I would just like to gather your perspective on this.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that, look, I mean, if I look at from our company's perspective, as MasterCard, processing whatever 180 odd billion transactions in a year, right, around the world. Now, one of the things underlying every transaction, every interaction for all of us, right? I mean, irrespective of the medium you're using, is trust, right? So trust is front and foremost in everything. And so I think that as the, so for us, like for example, cybersecurity, investments in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence is something I think we at MasterCard for over 2 decades now, it has been core to what we do, because protecting fraud and risk is something very, very critical, because otherwise, people won't use digital payments at all. And I think that, to do that, now, everything from, think about it, like there are so many variables that go into decision making, right? And now when, let us say, whether you are, it's a swipe or a tap or a tap of a card or, online and so forth, the milliseconds it takes to go for the transaction, to go from a terminal, right, to the endpoint, to whoever the issuer of the card is, get a validation, a score, come back again to the terminal with an authorization and all of that, requires tremendous amount of technology behind it, right? If we do, our engineers and so forth are looking at, what is the distance from from where the individual resides to where the transaction took place? How are you holding the phone? How are you typing into it? Like, all of these things generate some level of a score, right? Which then gives some kind of confidence level. Is it a genuine or is it a fraudulent transaction, right? Because then so I think for us, what we have to do, like and now you take all of that, but the underlying fundamental has to be, it has to, we have to take a very human-centric approach to design, right? You have to minimize bias, you have to be ethical, all of these responsible practices that are necessary, come into play. Which is why I think for us, we have very concrete design principles, like, it is about you own your data, you should decide how to use it. Our job is to protect it, right? Because privacy is very important. So I think that as models and, are being, and I think India this way is very, it's good. It's as long as it's a principles-based approach, with principles around safety, security, accountability, around transparency, around inclusivity, around social impact in terms of benefiting society. I think all of these are kind of important when you bring these models into actual use and impact to the end consumer. So that's what I would say, that I think those are all the aspects for us. It is very important in our design philosophy, putting the consumer at the center. So even all of these AI models, LLM, all of those, are at the very core, need to cater and make sure that we are. It is responsible. It's responsible AI.
Sir, I'm curious though, like in high deployment situations, right? Is there any specific sort of institutional failure that you observe, like that tends to come up when you deploy your AI ML products in India or something like that? Around that.
Can you rephrase that again? Sorry.
I was asking, like in high adoption environment like India, when capacity is not that much, and not just capacity but literacy, and there are other issues as well. Do you see any other form of sort of failures that you observe that are unique to the global south or unique to these sort of environments?
Yeah, I think obviously one has to be very careful of the what's the right word I'm looking for? If the false positives, right? Because I think the false positives is because there's nothing much more frustrating to an end user or a consumer in terms if you especially in in our business in payment, if the rate of false positives is high, you're just going to get frustrated and get away. So how do you then make sure that that in the design element you minimize that to get the right aspect of the actual authorization for consumer satisfaction?
That makes sense. That's a very interesting answer. Coming to Mr. Carlos, so from a diplomatic lens, AI governance is, it is mostly about trust and coordination and capacity, as we see, and whether the countries can learn from each other as well, without, I don't want to say the word, but importing certain templates of governance or ethics that may not fit the local realities. So in that way, I want to know that when countries talk about making AI safe and beneficial, what do you see as, a real risk, real world barrier that stops these intentions from becoming reality? When we talk about international or a global south-south sort of coordination as well, from becoming practice, and what kind of international cooperation will actually help turn these into practical sort of solutions?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation, Abdullah. Initially, the idea was to have a member of the Colombian delegation coming, but because that was not possible, he was so gracious to insist that I should be here. So regarding your question, I think there is a big challenge for Latin American countries in all these aspects of AI safety and not being left behind or be subjected to the imposition of all the aspects of governance of AI. What I can say is that in the Latin American region, there is one country that is developing their own AI model, is Chile. They are working on that. The other countries, my country, Colombia, is kind of an early adopter of technology. And I think that Colombia, as a member of OECD countries, we are part of this grouping of GPAI that is having its meeting on the 20th, that Colombia have endorsed all of that process of discussion to make AI safe and to be ethical and to try to be beneficial. So I would say that on the other side, there is also a lot of potentiality in terms of the capabilities that have our country in terms of the energy metrics. Colombia generates 60% of its energy hydro. So the possibility of hosting some data center also there in the region, and also with the impetus that my President Petro, is doing for climate change and for the needs of less dependency of fossil fuels, also could be a contributor. Now, in terms of cooperation, 6 countries that are part of the GPAI are also part of different groupings in Latin America. One, it's Pacific Alliance. So Pacific Alliance, it's a grouping that for sure will integrate the discussions forward. Also, India is part of the GPAI, and so the possibility of, through India, putting in front all the concerns of the countries of the Latin American region, it's very important. So I would stop there, and thank you for your question.
So I have one more question. Sorry. I just wanted to know, do you see any similarity in terms of deployment environments, like in terms of the capacity, similarity in terms of deployment environment of AI when we talk about India and Colombia? Like, is it similar in the way, deployment might work in India and in Colombia?
I see that like you can see right now that there is presence of technology-based companies of India and Colombia. Soho, is present in Colombia and has its Latin American headquarters there. They have been there, and they what they pride themselves that they base themselves in Colombia because of the talent pool that they could get there, and their association with the high quality universities, and plus that taking advantage of the 19 free trade deals that we have and the BIT treaties that we have. So from Colombia, they take care of a lot of European clients, and they says a lot about possibilities and of technological-based companies in India to move to Colombia. The other thing is that Colombia has a great advantage in the Latin American region is that it has been attracting foreign direct investment in a stable manner for the last 15 years. So that's that I could point that also as one pillar that could be attractive. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I would like to go to Kamesh and Jamila. I mean, you run Core AI. It's a coalition of responsible evolution of AI, a multi-stakeholder sort of an organization. So Kamesh, starting with you, what sort of challenges have you seen in the deployment space when you talk to like so many diverse sort of organizations, be it government and academia and industry, from an institutional lens? When we talk about failures and challenges and risks from an institutional lens, very broad. So do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I think like when we talk about like, institutionalizing safety, the major 2 points that I would like to make here is that which also comes from bank of things that we do with startups and like other industry things is like I think like when we talk about safety, like the standards that we actually are setting for ourselves is like, has to be least common factor. So most of the times, like when we talk about institutional safety or trust or like anything of those angle, it's always like we keep the bigger organization in mind, and then we kind of like go about, synthesizing how do we operationalize it, which might or may not actually let the smaller players out of this, not understanding they work in a different socioeconomic background, and like they come from a different stuff. So I think like one common factor when it comes to this is we need to look from the least common factor within which we operate within. We should be looking into this. Second aspect, I think like I keep talking about this in a lot of forums, and like I think like to an extent like Meti is also working on this, is when we talk about institutionalizing safety and trust and everything, one piece that we miss is incentive structure. Like what is there for the ecosystem to like go about doing this, right? Like one way is looking at a hard touch regulation, but that may not be the best way to go about doing given the the innovation curve that India is putting itself at this point of time. So then what are the other ways through which we can actually achieve is like making value, how can we make trust and safety a value proposition? How can that give a competitive advantage to people? So that is a piece that has to be pondered upon, so that I think when we were in those days, or when we talk about the privacy, we kind of talk about privacy first culture. How do we talk about privacy first culture is through making privacy something that is people compete on, right? So similarly, I think within AI, when we talk about trust and safety, that's where we should be aiming to move, where the ecosystem can pick it up themselves. So
So, Jamila, from your experience leading the coalition, in a way, the secretariat, what makes responsible AI commitments from all the stakeholders actually stick in practice? What do you think about that? And how can coalitions create value and accountability in this AI governance sort of space?
Right. Thanks, Abdullah, for having me on this panel. I feel that when we talk about AI safety, and this is basis our conversation with the 55 plus odd members that we have in our coalition, is that safety needs to be looked a little differently from what it is currently being looked at, right? Oftentimes we look at AI safety as a regulation problem and not so much as a capacity problem. And why I say this is because AI safety should be looked at the way state governments or the central governments procure AI. It should also be looked at the way it gets deployed, because a lot of times safety risks accrue because of misfit deployments, or deployments in a way that do not cater to the needs of the society or the issue that they're trying to sort of resolve. Sometimes it could also be because of the way state governments or governments at large procure AI, right? So in your vendor contracts, in your technical capabilities of deploying AI at large, I think it needs to be looked at from that standpoint as well. Another point that I'd like to bring to light here is that AI safety right now needs to be anchored through constitutional and democratic values in India. AI safety broadly should also include procedural justice, which means who gets to decide on the technology, but also substantive justice, facets of substantive justice, which is to include who is going to benefit from the technology and also who's at risk. So when you talk about all of this in our coalition meetings, we try to unravel a lot of what this truly means. Who's best benefiting, who's at risk, who gets to decide and call the shots. Which brings me to the next part of your question. Why do we set up coalitions like this? Our aim is to actually break the silos between different kind of stakeholders and to get them a seat on the table where these decisions are being made. And I think any kind of coalition building is significantly important right now, because when I talk about democratic values and its inclusion within AI, responsible AI, or AI safety at large, a big facet of that is going to be inclusiveness. It's going to be the ability of a small creator to influence the governance of it, at the same time also be chalked out by the bigger players in the ecosystem. I think it's going to be by creating, by sort of breaking down all of these barriers and creating a safe space for everyone to be on the same table and to influence how policy gets created in the country and how AI safety as a notion gets advanced. So I think that is what we're aiming to do at Core AI, and I think coalition building of any kind is very, very useful towards that.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a very interesting answer. Coming to Siddharth, Deb, there are two Siddharths here. So I know you have written about the AI Safety Institute and is there some issue? Okay, so yeah, perfect. So we know that even strong intentions fail without a clear institutional design. I want to get right into it and ask you that if we want AI safety to be operational, and drawing from your experience of working in this space and writing about the AI Safety Institute for India and all of that, I just want to know, if we want it to be operational, what should be the governance design inside these institutions that we want it to be, more or less?
Thanks. That's actually an excellent question, and a little bit I'll draw on my previous work on AI safety institutes, but also look at some previous work I've done in the context of cybersecurity. So one of the big things when it comes to strong institutional design in the realm of cybersecurity is incentives for proactive information sharing. So when there's a vulnerability somewhere in the ecosystem, if a player discovers it, what are the incentives that they'll go to the institute and actually disclose this is a vulnerability and this is how the rest of the ecosystem should respond to secure their individual nodes. The problem is that a lot of global majority countries tend to situate, let's say, cybersecurity institutions like your CERT within the enforcement architecture. But better design is to kind of remove enforcement authorities from cybersecurity or safety institutions and make them more like conduits of information sharing. So if you kind of design incentives in a way where safety institutes are more about information gathering and information pushing across the ecosystem. And then you create incentives where businesses, if they are good actors in the space, and if there is a breach, there are liability reductions that will create more forthcoming knowledge sharing between all corporate actors. So you need to really think about incentives there. The second thing is from an institutional capacity point of view. So like, let's say if we're trying to set up an AI safety institute, I think we need to, it's great that right now in the context of this Impact Summit, there have been conversations of setting up a global South network of AI safety institutes, because what we're talking about is there's a recognition that we need to pool resources so that everyone can benefit from their own areas of expertise and the international community as a whole can benefit. This summit flows from the Bletchley process, so we need to be also mindful that after the Seoul summit, there was the institution of an international network of AI safety institutes. It's important that if Global South countries are also setting up AI safety institutes, there's an opportunity for dialogue between global majority AI safety institutes and first world or developed country AI safety institutes. So what can happen is, so for example, the UK and US get early access to frontier models, and they're able to audit what are potential safety risks with models. So model evaluation is happening there. If you create MOUs and bilateral partnerships, that information can actually be shared with AI safety institutions in countries like India, so that instead of companies having to share their frontier model with each individual AI safety institute, information can essentially flow from, if one, like, let's say the UK Safety Institute finds an issue, it can share it within the network, and countries across the world can benefit. What value can Global South institutions bring? They can bring the perspective that safety cannot only be looked at through a technical lens. You need to have a human-centric point of view, and they can surface issues like linguistic exclusion and bias and discrimination. These networks of AI safety institutes through the Bletchley process can even set up thematic working groups, so that then you're actually problem solving and creating actionable templates on how to mitigate risks. But also at the same time, and one point that Arjun sir brought up, which was about clarifying responsibility across the value chain, right? I think that's super critical, but we also need to think about clarifying to what extent can businesses and the ecosystem collaborate and cooperate with governments. So what do I mean by that? Right now, just last week, there was reporting that certain military use cases of AI are also coming up. That's a huge problem for businesses, because they need to have a certain level of trust that the security interventions that they are undertaking are not being compromised by governments themselves. So we actually need to also have the Bletchley process feed into conversations at the United Nations. So for example, the UN has set up the Global Digital Compact, but also the Independent Scientific Panel on AI Safety, right? They need to start commencing a multilateral dialogue on what is responsible behavior, not just in cyberspace, but when it comes to responsible state behavior and the use of AI. So at least there is some clarity amongst businesses, civil society, and governments. These are areas we will cooperate with. And of course, these are areas of contestation. That kind of clarity is really super important. And we have templates for international cooperation at the UN level, because we've had a body of, since 2004, there have been UNGGEs and open working groups that have been deliberating what is responsible state behavior in cyberspace for international cybersecurity, and we need like parallel conversations on AI safety as well. So I'll pause there.
Sir, absolutely, yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that Colombia was the first country to adopt UNESCO guidelines for AUs in judicial systems, even though we still don't have a national AI safety institute, but we have a planning authority that's released recently in 2025 a document for how to regulate AI. So it's a work in progress, but.
Colombia has been one of the first countries to get into the AI ethical space, in fact, post-LLM boom, which is quite interesting. first among the global south at least. I want to come to Professor Chauhan and Dr. Goswami for this next question, starting with Professor Chauhan. So, in real world context, accountability depends on what can be shown, reviewed, contested, especially when harm is alleged. I want to know that what should institutions be able to show in a simple and credible way to demonstrate responsible AI use when decisions are questioned? And how do you think legal and governance frameworks should shape that standard to a degree?
Right. So, if you talk from the point of the 7 sutras, which, we're sort of building and talking about, from human capital to safe AI practices, and which, of course, shows that, the focus is on the global safety in global south. But, AI safety in India, it also needs to be a tool for India. And it sort of begins from procurement, which is a level for AI safety. The India AI mission has a budget, and I think they need to sort of think about how procurements are happening, and from a startup level, that how we are thinking about startups, essentially, like how we are widening access. And also, what Mr. Goswami brought in about the SGI rules which have come in. So especially, if the government is trying to have more investments and they're trying to encourage startups, I think there is a need to sort of have those mandatory origin labels specifically, and how we are sort of clarifying that is, of course, a challenge. And third-party verification comes, which is important. I think that's there. And graded liability is one bit which I want to focus on. But also the techno-legal safeguards which need to be instilled right when the technology comes in, which sort of, 2026 IT rules sort of focus on labels and markers. That's a good example, but how technology sort of created right in the beginning, they do create certain safeguards. And essentially, when we're talking about the safety measures, I think very critical bit is on sovereign AI as well. Where we talk about the AI infrastructure and how much of computation and data sets actually exist versus in India. So I think that's something where India produced 20% of the data, and we only have 3% of the world's data sets, data center spaces. But AI Kosh is on that direction, but seems a bit of a challenge there. And I think, and linking your question to what we were discussing about institutional failures and the path forward, I think when we are talking about multiple layers where data protection authorities also come in, at the same time the government intervention is around that we want to make it easier for players, and there is ease of doing business, then I think we need to sort of clarify how that is going to have a single clearance windows specifically. And there is future skills program which needs to then focus on training experts on AI safety assessments and essentially grow the audit market. There needs to be sort of coordination between the regulatory bodies, otherwise it's going to see the same fate when we say competition authority versus say another regulator. So I think that clarity should come right in the beginning. And of course, Siddharth spoke about the role of safety institutes. So I think the guidelines need to sort of, be clearer on that sense.
It's very interesting. And Dr. Goswami, I just want to know the same thing from you. So legal and governance framework that could shape that standard. Yeah.
On harms. So what a great panel you have. It's really hard to follow on after them. But let me just maybe say this, reflecting a little bit on things they brought up. There's always going to be a lag between, especially the speed of machine learning and what we're seeing in terms of technological deployment and where law and regulation is. There's that gap, in fact, is increasing. So as this deployment takes place, there's also risk. What do you do? One answer which India has is kind of only a partial answer, is sandboxing. So you say, okay, you don't fully deploy it, you just put it in a sandbox. But people aren't going to be satisfied with putting things in a sandbox. They'll want to fully deploy. So actually, listening to Siddharth, I felt he was really on to, by which I mean this Siddharth. I mean, the other Siddharth is great too, actually, on what he said. But we're listening to this Siddharth, is on the procurement side. So, one lesson which we can learn from Brazil is what they did in Sao Paulo on the metro system. It's kind of interesting because what they did was they built in an algorithmic impact assessment. And they made sure that before deployment took place, that risk was assessed. So they're not stopping deployment, but they're saying mandatorily, you have to have that impact assessment. It's a way in which you can manage the risk. There's another very famous example, which is the IBM Watson case. You guys will know this, where they were deploying medical technology using AI, but the result was hugely expensive drugs, not appropriate in a global south country. Again, you need to have procurement tools which will step in and manage that risk before that deployment takes place. If you're going to wait for an answer from regulation and law to do it, I don't think you've got an adequate answer, really. I mean, we can all try. We all should. I think all the things that people are suggesting are important. But we need to tailor this, and we need to tailor this because global south countries, certainly a country like ours, has a huge number of languages, has entities at different levels. So when I was talking about liability, Siddharth, the other Siddharth, he's right that there's a value chain, but there's also gradations in terms of types of entities. Why should a startup entity be pushed to the same level of compliance as a large entity? You need to have that built in, right? So if all those things can come, I think we can manage harms much better.
I think that's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you, Dr. Goswami, on this. Last but not the least, Ms. Banerjee, I want to ask you, from your ecosystem vantage point, because you support startups in India and other countries, what practices should AI builders adopt as non-negotiables before selling them into high-stake settings?
That's a great question, actually, Abdullah. So especially when we work with startups, but I think what my answer, I'll make it generic because there are some non-negotiable factors. Doesn't really matter whether it's corporate, GSIs, GCCs, startups, anyone for that matter. So whatever is the size, the first thing is there is no one-size-fits-all kind of a solution, and that's quite apt for AI safety as well. While we are all working on the framework and trying to make some guidelines so that we are all safe and actually enabling AI safety, it's very difficult because we are all doing it for the first time. There is no precursor, we don't have any learnings, so things should be pretty flexible at this point in time so that it can change with the time as we learn. So that's the first thing. But when it comes to the enablement, the question that Abdullah was putting, so I think we still have a tendency where we see that this becomes more of a compliance paperwork, right? Because, okay, this has been imposed upon me. So there was a lot of discussion on the incentivization of it. That's the reason that incentivization in the first place is coming into the discussion, because otherwise it is more of an imposition that's done. But what we should actually consider it is, especially when it comes to evaluation, when it comes to guardrails, that's infrastructure, and also when it comes to governance. This should actually be first-class engineering problems. These are not AI safety problems at all. Because if we consider that as an engineering problem, then we will deal it in a very different way. So if evaluation always has to be continuous, it's not a one kind of a deal, right? It's not a one-way procedure, it's not a one-time thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when we are talking about guardrails, so guardrails has to understand the infrastructure. They have to be infrastructure aware, no matter how big or how small the infrastructure is. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the governance. So governance has to be operationally tested. So governance cannot be just dictated by the terms and conditions, because what might have worked in some other geography, or maybe in the same geography for a different industry, might drastically fail for another. So we have seen that with scale. So that's the reason there's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a solution. And I saw that there was a lot of discussion on the procurement side as well. So I'll just put in a last point on that. So we all discuss about that, okay, is this system accurate? What is the latency? What is the accuracy? What is the throughput? So, but everything at the end of the day is talking about quality, but no one hardly talks about that, is this system auditable? can we inspect this system? Can we suspend this system? If we cannot do that, if we cannot audit the system, we cannot govern it. That's the reality. So I think that's something that, regardless of whether it's a startup, it's a scale-up, it's an enterprise corporate, that's what that we should be doing. And before we are going for adopting AI safety, 3 questions we should know how to articulate, not just for the sake of paperwork. The first thing is that what is AI really solving? Who is the person accountable if it fails? And what happens if the model degrades and the data shifts? Because these are bound to happen. So if we don't know the answer for it, I don't think so they are matured enough to actually employ it just for the sake of it.
Thank you so much, Banerjee. And thank you so much, everyone. We just have 1.5 minutes left, so maybe let's just do questions quickly. If there are any questions in the audience. Yes, let's just collect all of them and then we can go through it. Yeah, absolutely.
So good evening, everyone. The panel was amazing because I think we have people from all over. Like, the panel is very diverse, so it was a lot to learn. But I think my question is to you, sir, to Goswami, sir, because he said a point which was much to my interest, wherein he said that we have a blind spot to e-waste generation that is going to happen in this process that we're talking about. And a lot of people also talked about how there should be inbuilt things in the software, that incentives actually, that people follow a certain thing, that businesses follow certain things. So what do you think can be the incentives for businesses that they make green AI? Because I don't think so businesses would like to really do that.
You know, it's true that businesses will ultimately look to their profitability, but I think we've long passed the point where we just talk about shareholder capitalism. I mean, we have for a long time been in the age of stakeholder capitalism and corporate social responsibility. That's mandatory in India. The question now becomes, with really large investment on the horizon for data centers, etc., what requirements need to be put in place for all those collateral things that we should be concerned about right from the start, not as an afterthought. So, you know, the reason I brought up the waste issue is that, you know, a lot of this is it's not just a matter of toxic leakage, it's a matter of who's doing it. The gig workers who are doing it. It's the informal economy that's doing it. Now, if this is linked back to where the labor codes are headed in terms of better standards, you know, higher wages, etc., we can, I think, push hard for a better solution rather than just say, well, we want the FDI to come in. Yes, we're concerned about our foreign direct investment levels, and AI is going to be a big promoter of that, hopefully. But see it in the whole: social, environmental, governance, all of it. It's the ESG covering on top. Yeah. It's a question for the rest of them, right?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So my question is with Juan, sir. Yeah, so I just checked that December 2024 UNESCO guideline that Colombia adopted, and that's specifically for use of AI systems in courts and tribunals. So I just wanted to ask you, it's a very much open space question, I'm not going to evaluate you, that what exactly, it's 2 years down the line after they have adopted that in the court systems, what kind of issues are still not able to be addressed by AI? Because even in India, it's even more complicated. So if you can shed some light on that.
Thank you for the question, and I don't have the answer, but but I promise that I will research it.
I was expecting that.
It's a very nice challenge, and thank you for the question.
Thank you so much.
Hello, so my question is, anybody can answer it. So we've had a discussion about Latin countries, Colombia, Brazil and everything. But there's one country that we're all missing, that is China. And China also released recently the AI guidelines or principles in its Cybersecurity Act. So what are the benefits and what are the flaws of a system like China, which treats cyberspace as its territory? And as a following question, the question of digital exceptionalism. Since security is the first condition of freedom, so how far can we, what is the middle ground between digital exceptionalism, where we could sacrifice or compromise the individual rights or the digital privacy rights, and how do we balance it? How do we come at a middle stage? So these are the two questions. Anybody gonna?
Let's just do all the questions. So just wrap it up quickly. If there are any other, I think we had one in the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about regulation. Given that so much AI is reliant and underpinned by personal data, I've heard a lot today around trust. I'm really interested in the panel's perspectives on the role of the regulator in enforcing, in terms of its enforcement posture. I don't know if the panel would like to comment on that. We've obviously heard around the need for kind of guidance and sandboxes and more in that proactive space. I think what's missing and what I haven't heard very much of is beyond kind of audit capability is enforcement and making sure that people know, citizens know, that regulators like myself have their backs. I'd be interested in anyone's views on that.
So I'll just try to first start with the China question. So in terms of the way that China has approached AI governance so far is primarily through its cyberspace administrative institution, but more so it's actually set up an algorithms register. So that registration institution, so they keep on passing piecemeal regulations, and more often than not, it directs local companies to make disclosures in terms of how they're using AI and how they're deploying their algorithms. So it's kind of a piecemeal approach, but one positive lesson from the Chinese experience is that, over time, incrementally, it's investing in institutional capacity to know more about how these systems work before making directives towards businesses. The downside, of course, is it leaves itself a lot of discretion when it comes to enforcing any company behavior that intersects with politics. So of course that has an implication for civil and political rights. On the question of data audits, I think in countries like India, what we're looking at is more so, instead of getting the regulator itself to undertake the audit, we're looking at requirements where businesses have to get, or larger businesses have to get independent audits done and then submit those to the regulator. So that's kind of a tertiary kind of way to implement our legal systems, but I guess it's a more pragmatic approach.
The beeper went off and it says time's up, so I really can't answer the question anymore. No. Just maybe a very brief one. So, as far as regulators are concerned, our regulators are looking at applications of AI, particularly in the financial sector, and they are concerned about issues of bias, for example, coming into areas like credit scoring, etc. So it's not like that's not happening. There are advisories coming out, and the financial sector regulators in particular, and to some extent the telecom regulator, are going into that space. But what we're not seeing is a very heavy-handed, overarching regulatory enforcement. That's really where we are today. Last point, we have a lot of data in our country. We should seek to leverage that for advantage for ourselves, right? Companies are going to come here to want access to that data. The comment at the back was, it's all going to be about personal data. A lot of AI is not going to be personal data. It's going to be aggregate, anonymized data, which shouldn't be de-anonymized, and it should be non-personal data. Let me stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the speakers and to everyone for coming. And we have to conclude this now. So, yeah, thank you.